Today's video will look at the basics of outlines, how to do them, and why they're useful. Outlines have multiple purposes and can come in a variety of formats. They are very good tools for organizing information. You can make outlines of materials that you read so that you can better understand what those sources were about and how the material was organized. Today, we will focus, however, on creating an outline for a substantial research project, such as a seminar paper. The outline helps establish what points you will make, how you will make them, and the order in which you will present them in the paper. It is a good idea to see an outline as a working document. That is, it can be something that you add to and revise as you move along in your research. The more detailed your outline is, the easier it will be to produce a draft. If you're doing an outline as a formal assignment, pay close attention to the directions the professor has given to you, because there are many different ideas about how best to do outlines. Before you start writing your outline, you should have a working title and a working thesis. Working in this case means that you might revise them, but having a title and a thesis at the early stages will help you stay focused as you research and write. Some professors may ask you to put your thesis or main claim before the outline itself, while others may ask you to incorporate it into the outline so they can see where you plan to present your claim. It might also be useful to brainstorm all the ideas you want to include in your paper. Write them all down on a piece of paper or type them out, then you can set about organizing them. An outline gives you a way to order the information in a series of subsections that become more specific as you get to deeper levels of that outline. Outline formats are useful because they allow you to visualize the information in a structure. There are many ways you can do outlines, but the most common approach, and the one you will be asked to use in writing about music, is an alphanumeric outline, meaning it uses a combination of number styles and letters. Roman numerals, capitalized letters, Arabic numerals, and lowercase letters are used for the first levels. Indentation is used to show different levels of information. The wider the margin on the left, the more detailed the information. Roman numerals represent the most basic level of the paper's outline. Your paper will definitely need to have an introduction, a body, also called the evidence or sometimes evidentiary, and a conclusion. So that's a good starting point for an outline, and it's the most basic way to sort the information from your brainstorm. Think of this as the stick figure version of a person, of a drawing of a person. We have no details, but we know we are looking at something intended to be a paper, much in the way we know a stick figure is supposed to be a person. Your job will be to fill in the outline as if you were enhancing a stick figure to look more and more like an actual person with more and more details. The next step is to create the large subsections for the introduction, body, and conclusion. To do that, you will use capital letters. For the introduction, you might decide that you want your first major section, marked A, to introduce the topic of your paper, to provide some context. The next subsection, B, might be a good place for your thesis, and maybe you want to end your introduction with C, a sentence that makes the organization of your paper clear to the reader so that they know what they're about to read in the body. For the body of the paper, you will want to determine the major areas of your discussion and how you are going to divide it. Each of these areas will be several paragraphs or pages long and will make up the largest portion of your paper. For the conclusion, Roman numeral 3 on your outline, you might have a section where you review your main claims that you made in the body of the paper, followed by another section where you suggest areas of further research and broader ramifications of that research. How many large subsections you have will be determined by your project and how you want to structure the paper. You may find yourself combining sections or adding sections as time goes on, and that's what makes outlining so useful. Now, each of those larger subsections will have smaller subsections. And the smaller subsections are denoted by Arabic numerals. Again, the number of sections, smaller subsections, will vary for every paper. Depending on how detailed you want your paper or need your outline to be, you would continue creating smaller and smaller sections. Not every section needs to have the same number of items, but at the beginning levels, it's a good idea to try to have at least 2 items for every larger subsection if possible. In an outline for a 10 to 15 page paper, once you get to the lowercase letters and numbers in your outline, you might be representing paragraphs or even musical examples. A very detailed outline might have several levels, particularly in the body section of the paper. It will be easier to see if we fill in our outline with information for a hypothetical paper topic. Let's work with the fictional paper topic and thesis featured in the video on thesis-driven writing. In that video, our fictional paper topic was looking at different stylistic influences in a particular work by a fictional composer named Rocky Guggenheim. Our thesis was Rocky Guggenheim's Montmartre for 10 cellos, shows the minimalist influences from his time spent studying with Steve Reich, but also engages with 19th century concepts of tonality in its application of chromatic harmony. So here's one possibility for the basic level outline for that paper. The introduction might start with the circumstances of the composition, followed by a brief discussion of the work's categorization as minimalist, letter B under Roman numeral 1. And then C represents the thesis and the organizational sentence that you might place near the end of the introduction. The body will cover the 2 major discussion areas of the paper, and they might be focused first on the minimalist aspects of the work, and second on the romantic harmony found in the work. Finally, under Roman numeral 3, the conclusion would revisit the main points made in the body of the paper and might make a broader statement that minimalism involves more varied harmonic language than some scholars have implied. Now, what you see here is a very basic outline, and this would be insufficient for a writing about music outline assignment, but it would be a good starting point. Let's go in on another level of detail. Here we filled in more detail about each of the subsections in the basic outline. The introduction tells us when and where the piece was composed and who commissioned it. It will then discuss that the piece is often framed as minimalist, but we want to make the point that it stands outside of other minimalist works in terms of its harmonic languages. We put our thesis near the end of the introduction and would want to write it out in its entirety. The outline for the body of the paper goes into more detail about how we will organize 2 major areas of discussion. We want to discuss first the extent of Steve Reich's influence on Rocky Guggenheim's music. Specifically, we will use 2 works by Steve Reich to note the similar approaches to rhythm taken by both composers. We also want to demonstrate Montmartre calls upon the layering technique seen in many different minimalist works. The second area of the paper is looking at the so-called romantic harmonic aspects of Montmartre. We will start by defining what we mean by that, offering a general overview of chromatic language as used by Franz Liszt and others. Perhaps we've already done an analysis of the harmonic language in the piece and have found several examples that demonstrate what we were trying to prove. Well, let's go ahead and put them in the outline then, so we don't forget to include them. This also shows that you have already analyzed the music that you are discussing, which of course should be one of the first steps before you invest in secondary sources. We decide to end the second section of the body of the paper with a thoughtful understanding of how the chromaticism affects the minimalist style of the piece. Finally, the conclusion. Here, we first revisit the main points that we made in the body of the paper regarding the influence of Steve Reich and how the chromatic harmony sets the work apart from other popular minimalist works. And we end with a broader point that addresses conventional thoughts about minimalism and encourages more engagement with harmonic variety. While most outlines do not use complete sentences, if English is not your first language, you are encouraged to use complete sentences so that you can practice expressing your ideas as you will in the paper itself. Ultimately, an outline allows you to see the organizational structure of the information. The more levels in your outline, the more detailed it is. It also gives you the opportunity to reorganize the structure before you're looking at a full draft of prose. Even in the drafting stage, it is important to keep referring back to your outline to make sure your paper will maintain structure and cohesion.